brought to you and authorized by Mpho Magwana. Welcome to the third episode of the Contributive Citizenship podcast. My name is Sintlenel and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us in this 12-part series as we unpack the concept of contributive citizenship and get closer to the man behind the term Mpho Magwana. In the previous episode, we got to know more about young Mpho, his activisms, the tensions faced in apartheid South Africa, and the resilience that he garnered. In today's episode, we delve into the third quadrant of his life, looking at the years 18 to 28, and getting to understand how contributive citizenship showed up in his early adult years and the events that shaped his life during that time. Welcome to the Contributive Citizenship podcast. Mpho, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
In the previous episode, it was such a rich anthology of your life and particularly of your activism. But I think, again, a key point that stood out for me was you showcasing how contributive citizenship is to be seen through the lens of being uncomfortable with the status quo and how all of us have that responsibility. And while it's clear that your entire life is a testament to contributive citizenship and it's threaded through it, if we look at 18 to 28, that specific quadrant, what are some of the major decisions that you had to take and what were the responsibilities attached to that point in your life?
So in the previous episode, we ended in the phase with the Department of Labor when I became the first director for equal opportunities. So that now is the period already 24, 25. So 25 for me also added a change in status. That's where I got married. And in my first marriage at age 25, I had to balance a growing career, perhaps, if I may be immodest, a flourishing career at 25, and now needing to figure out how to become a married person, balancing your interest with a partner's interest. So the thing that stands out always whenever I talk to my first wife about this is that, so I keep on saying first wife because I'm a polygamist, so I married my second wife much later. But our honeymoon in the first marriage, the second night, the following day we had to get up early to catch a plane from the nearest airport to our honeymoon location to Cape Town, where I was a guest speaker at the forum of the Western Cape regional structure of the Institute of People Management, on, at that time, the topical subject of employment equity and organizational transformation. So my first wife, Tsiamo, had to adapt early to two things. One, in the spiritual community of the IPHC, already at that time I was involved in the church administration. So she knew that she was married to someone who was married to the church, but equally then later found that she's married to someone who's married to his work. So she then got to adapt and adjust. Of course, being a professional herself, she could fill those gaps in between with her work. The journey then, if you link it back to contributive citizenship, in hindsight now, the people I coach, I always advise them to first and foremost seek to define their life purpose as central anchor. I think at 25, I intuitively knew what it was, but I didn't know how to articulate it. At 25, I intuitively knew about being a productive citizen, but I didn't know that I could one day label it contributive citizenship. So when I coach people, I first say to them, the first out of 7 dimensions you must be clear about is firstly the me, we world. How do I show up as me, the person? And we, how do I show up in my spheres of family, professional network, and all the we zones that you interact with people socially. And then the second dimension I ask people to articulate themselves in is you as a life partner. I separate that from you as a provider. And later we'll talk about it just now when we start talking about generational dynamics. You then define yourself as a husband, in my case. Define yourself in age 29, I became a father for the first time. You define yourself as a father. Then thirdly, define yourself in terms of a community, whatever community means to you. To me, community is multifold. Community means my primary community is the IPHC, the International Pentecostal Holiness Church community, because a big chunk of my time and my existence revolves around the community. It's a community of more than 3 million people spread throughout Southern Africa across just under 300 branches. I've serviced them, again, as part of my contributive citizenship. So quadrant number 5 is saying to people, also figure out how you show up in your spiritual community. Who you are in terms of your life purpose as an individual, as a husband, as a father, as a community member must be the same person that shows up in your spiritual community.
So that consistency throughout.
Yeah, because we tend to wear too many faces.
Sure.
People tend to be somebody else at home, somebody else at church, all sociable and all jolly and holy, and then somebody else as a partner cheating on your wife or wife cheating on husband, because you're not the same person. So you've got to make sure that if you're honorable throughout. Quadrant 6 is in the economy, which we spoke a lot about earlier. How you show up there must be the same principled person that shows up at home, shows up as a father. And then lastly, as an intellectual, that's constantly sharpening the sword. How you show up as someone who's studying further, who's developing themselves further. You've got to develop yourself further. And I always say, I don't propose that we all should have PhDs. I'm just saying, sharpen the sword all the time. It can be a short course of a week. It can be a short course of 3 months. It can be a short course of a year, but constantly sharpen the sword. So at 25 also, I would say that's when my career did more than jet off. It actually, rocketed. Whilst in the Department of Labor, it became clear, I've always known that I'm not a regimental person. I detest bureaucracy. But my contributive citizenship journey took me to being a bureaucrat, a civil servant, for the second time. My first job was in a bureaucracy in the Department of Post and Telecoms as an assistant personnel beamte. I think I may have shared it somewhere. And so you learned even then, there's a thing that looks like an ice pick that we used to pierce through paper.
Okay.
So in the old civil service of PNT, Post and Telecoms, if you write a memo to your chief, let's say I'm an assistant personal officer reporting to a senior assistant personal officer who reports to a personnel officer who reports to a chief personnel officer.
Sure.
We're not even at director level yet. So you write this thing. So we didn't have email in 1991 when I started working. So a memo arrives at your desk and you read it. Maybe it's a request from post person delivering post or whoever, asking this and this and the other. Now you must refer it to your chief personnel officer. So as assistant, you first write to the person, we hereby acknowledge your letter, But before you sign it, it gets included in the pack that goes to the chief personnel officer. Because the chief personnel officer is going to read the whole thing. And you know what's going to come back? A few signatures down, it comes back. And all he says is noted to you, signature. And then in pencil next to where you should sign says approved. You can sign, in other words. And then you sign. Of course, if there's a comma missing, it's going to come back and say noted. And there'll be lots of red marks and so on. And then later you become a personnel officer. There's a thing called a submission in the civil service. Before your decision is made, you go 6 signatures up, 6 signatures down. So each level gets to noted.
Okay.
The one at the top approves, and then as it comes down, you acknowledge the approval, acknowledged until it gets back to you, the originator. So, I mean, how much time gets lost? But you appreciate that this is a bureaucracy. There are procedures, there are public interest issues. That's why there's bureaucracy. So when I became a director, it was quite clear that I wasn't going to sustain. I was not happy. I was contributing, but I was not happy. I mean, you're trying to make a difference in this new South Africa, but to get to the minister at 6 signatures, you're a director now. Director, chief director, DDG, DG, minister, all the way down. So I remember going to the minister's house. He had a flat here in Killarney, saying to him, Chief, I love the context of what I'm asked to do to contribute, but the bureaucracy is killing me. I really need to move on. So the only economic excuse I could use then, which I'm sure he has forgiven me for, was, look, I just got married. He came to our wedding as well, bless his soul. I just got married, and now, the economic demands. I've got to find a better job to provide for my family. But the real thing was the bureaucracy. It was just killing me. And so that journey progressed. I then returned to the private sector, joined an organization called Ogilvy and Mather, Rydford, Siltrip, and Macon. Today, just simply Ogilvy. So all these many surnames were the South African founding partners of Ogilvy South Africa. As initially Human Resources Director and Head for Transformation. And most significantly for me, there was a duality in that I got to be exposed to the world of branding and reputation building and all those good things that come with it. But later in that industry, I became chairperson, taking over from a legend in that industry, Nkwenkwe Nkomo, and that Nkomo Mafinyangoli, as chairperson of the Association of Communication Agencies. It used to be called the AAA, and it got later changed to Association of Communication Agencies, helping to lead the charter on transforming the advertising industry. There were debates around racism in advertising. My first appearance at the portfolio committee was then to go and debate with then portfolio committee members on what needed to happen to transform the sector, transform the media sector, including SABC and others. And so my contributive journey took me there. Later, took me into the operations of agencies. I joined Saatchi & Saatchi as managing director for the Johannesburg agency and later chief executive of the group. And now we're in the early 30s. I joined, after that I joined the Marketing Federation of Southern Africa as CEO, with the hope that if you influence how marketers think about these things, you then can influence the value chain, because ad agencies are second-tier value chain to the marketing profession. My father passed on in 2004. And so becoming, I guess, as a firstborn, becoming the patriarch, I had to figure out different ways of being able to support myself, my broader family. So I then had to shift jobs. At that time already, I had already become the youngest director at Eskom at the age of 32 on the board of directors of Eskom in 2002. Prior to that, my exposure to governance was largely in non-profit roles. So I chaired the publications board of an institution. I had become president of the Institute of People Management. But it would be the first time that I'm now sitting on a board of directors where these things are serious and it means business. When you're on the audit committee, it's serious stuff. So at 34, 2 years into my role as a non-executive director, my dad passed. So I felt I needed a different role that would allow me, firstly, flexibility to be closer to home in Limpopo to wrap up his estate, but most crucially, to be able to be in a, I guess, self-sustaining environment. So I got headhunted by Standard Bank. A remarkable man called Craig Bond was head of retail at Standard Bank. Remarkable because he had this notion that if you recruited a lot of people with marketing and FMCG background, you would change the retail culture of a bank. So it was myself. There was a gentleman who used to be head of Nando's regional in Gauteng. He got invited to be director for Gauteng, one of the Gauteng regions. I got to be director in Limpopo. A very successful man that I'm sure you get to read a lot about. I hold in high regard, Lincoln Mali. Was Gauteng South, based in Bedford View. So it was quite a number of us. He was a lawyer who also was not a banker by traditional standards. And that fitted well with my inclination towards strategy. At this point, I had already participated in 3 major scenario thinking projects. One was with SA Breweries in 99 into 2000, where my scenario thinking mentor is a gentleman by the name of Louis van der Merwe, Professor Louis van der Merwe to be complete, who founded the Center for Innovative Leadership and used to be a close associate of Peter Senge and a few global thinkers in the area of systems thinking and scenario thinking. Later got involved by his invitation also as an associate. They call you a remarkable person, where you get to bring outside-in insights into a scenario thinking project. We got involved with the MTN scenarios. MTN was transitioning from being called MCell into MTN in the early years of the mobile industry taking root. And from those 2, then I got involved with other scenarios inside Eskom, inside other places where I became a director. And so contributive citizenship, again, in a marketing context at Saatchi & Saatchi particularly, or perhaps in transition from Ogilvy to Saatchi, the notion of cause-related marketing took root in the late 90s into the 2000s while I was in the marketing communications sector. And Saatchi used to brandish a case study of, in 1986, Amnesty International was celebrating a major anniversary. And they went to Reebok and Nike to ask for them to adopt them as a good cause and in turn be a sponsor.
Okay.
Reebok was a brand associated with activism. A lot of people from the hippie movement, so a lot of baby boomers, that was their brand. And Nike was a challenger to Reebok at the time. And Nike was struggling with the fact that they had the dilemma of wanting to produce a quality shoe at low cost. And made in China was not fashionable yet. And at the time, they had to deal with perceptions which later were exposed in various media houses of their shoes being made in sweatshops where there was children being subjected to child labor. So Reebok adopted Amnesty International, and as a result could rub into Nike that you're not a progressive shoemaker brand. And cause-related marketing in its profound form could be traced, among others, to that Amnesty International campaign. So in Saatchi also, remember, was the power behind Margaret Thatcher's career in terms of political marketing. And so inside Saatchi as a leader, one got to also see a lot of case studies of how they had gone about to engender good cause marketing. And at that time, there was not even talk of ESG. We were still talking about triple bottom line in corporates. So in various journeys in ESCOM, which is where I think the most complex shape of ESG one could find, just by virtue of size and complexity of ESCOM, you would be exposed to all manner of scenario thinking, complex marketing. If you think of the LSM model, it was born in ESCOM. When ESCOM was going through the electrification program in the early 90s in South Africa, they had to cluster homes in terms of which home has appliances, which home doesn't have appliances.
Yes.
So they could figure out how to allocate electrification, free electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And unbeknown to ESCOM, they would be creating a lexicon for the marketing communications in terms of LSM 1 to 8. So all those exposures, and as you grow as a director now, you start understanding the meaning of good governance and good corporate citizenship. Along this journey, when President Mbeki was in office, he set up the International Marketing Council. And I was under the leadership of May Wendy Luhabe when she was chair, and May Yvonne Johnson, who was CEO, the period between 2003 and 2006. I was a trustee on the board of the International Marketing Council, Brand South Africa. And so now you could start seeing how, at a big picture of a country, good citizenship, corporate citizenship, takes shape. And it is around that period that we got exposed to the work of the person who ultimately inspired me to start thinking about contributive citizenship, Simon Arnold. He published a study called the Good Country Index. And the Good Country Index has evolved over the years. And today, in today's terms, around the COVID period, he published a book called the Good Country Index. So equation. So the study is Good Country Index. It's a survey that's matured. A lot of countries use it to benchmark themselves in terms of how they position themselves as a good country. It's different to the Global Competitiveness Report and the World Economic Report in that this one says, how do you reputationally position your country?
Okay.
And so when you look at all that, then it leads you to one conclusion. What is my fair share as a leader towards contributing to my country's good country equation? And if you overlay that, as if I've not overlaid too much complexity, if you overlay that with the era where an American president led an army into Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction, that war exposed something fundamental in politics and macroeconomic dynamics. It exposed the fact that governments were becoming less and less driven in true authenticity. They are less and less driven by the will of the people. Politicians will tell you that they're driving the will of the people. Bless them. But really, the people who set the agenda for politicians are kleptocrats.
Yeah.
People who fund political campaigns, people who make money available for political parties to campaign to assume power in office. And so I think that the biggest lesson from state capture, I'm now way past the teens now, I'm now in my 50s. The biggest lesson from state capture is that we now see that there's a dichotomy in the world. There's a tension point, not just in South Africa, but across the universe, between those citizens that seek to make a good contribution and those of genuinely a good contribution, and those citizens that just want to extract out of public resources. So now as leaders, we as an individuals, as citizens, we have to choose between, do I want to be a contributive citizen or do I want to be an extractive citizen? An extractive citizen are those that use brown envelopes, use political patronage and all sorts of things to benefit unduly from their proximity to political power to benefit commercially from those political relationships. That's what state capture really is about. And so my views, we made a mistake by labeling it state capture. We should have called it what it is. It's kleptocracy. We would then have had the benefit of looking at world practices elsewhere, including, among others, this good country index, because the poor country index, countries that rank with a poor country index, are those that are infested with kleptocracy, where you can't even, as a politician, go to the bathroom without asking for permission from your kleptocrats.
Yeah.
And those that are in the upper echelon of good country index, even though they may have kleptocrats, they figured out maybe the sophistry of being sophisticated about showing themselves reputationally as being driven by the will of the people and less by the will of kleptocrats. But contributive citizenship is really about all of us making a conscientious effort to seek and build a better world, a better country, better world, as people who make a meaningful contribution in all our endeavors, rather than simply riding along and getting the perks and benefits from being associated with powerful people or being in close proximity to powerful people.
It seems to me that even in looking at responsibility and the consciousness of wanting to contribute and not extractive is also getting feedback and people calling you out, as the young ones would say. How did you, in your careers and in your path of becoming a contributive citizen, how did you handle negative feedback? One, as a young professional, but also as someone that was contributing towards society.
As a young person, I guess you're bound to make mistakes. As a leader, generally, you're bound to make mistakes. When I was chair of the largest steelmaking company in South Africa, which is also the largest steelmaking company in the world, I had to constantly be confronted by people from Green Justice, Greenpeace, and all sorts of green movements about the impact of the production line on the environment and on communities. When I was chair at ESCOM, even in the first term that led to the delivery of the FIFA World Cup, when we went to seek loans, two important loans I was involved with. The loan that the World Bank gave for the construction of Medupi, and the subsequent loan that was given for the construction of Kusile. Those were my last major projects that I got involved with as chair of ESCOM until June 2011. We had to go and convince, I literally had to, because in the first instance in 2009-10, I was doing both the role of chair and the role of chief executive in one. And the then Minister of Finance, who we passed away recently, bless his soul, Minister Gordon, gave me a call and said, "You've got to go to the World Bank." And what do I need to do then, Minister? They need to hear from you as chair of ESCOM, because we've gone there as government, we've persuaded them, but they want to hear from you why they must support another coal-powered power station in an era where the world is going green. And so we then had to figure out a model. The gentleman I worked closely with at that time in strategy was a veteran. I would call him Steve Lennon. We sat together and I said to him, Steve, I need a model. And we were talking again in this vocabulary of not necessarily calling contributive citizenship, but good citizenship. Okay. And so we later arrived at a model called the economic factor. If you Google ESCOM factor, you'll find there's a model that shows 6 dimensions of how a large industrial organization like that can articulate itself in terms of its contribution to society as a tax fiscus contributor, its contribution to jobs, its impact on the environment, its carbon footprint, contribution to society in terms of training and development, bursaries, learnerships. So those 6 dimensions later got replaced in recent times by the SDGs. So we then took that economic factor report on ESCOM. So it shows that often an organization impacts 5-fold into society.
Yes.
So if you employ, in that case, we employed 32,000 people, it means 32,000 people times 5, roughly 150 something people get impacted by the work of ESCOM. And so if you then look at ESCOM relative to SADC and the continent, it was number 10 in the world, not in the continent, in the world at that time, by generation capacity. It meant that if the World Bank turned their back, this is the words we used, if they turned their back on funding ESCOM, then they would be turning their backs on 1 billion people on the continent benefiting from this utility.
Yes.
So we were able to showcase why it was important based on ESCOM's corporate citizenship and therefore contributive citizenship impact. And later, even with ArcelorMittal, when I was chair, we did a similar study. It's published on their website as AMSA Factor. We looked at how steel making, dirty as steel making is, given the combination of iron ore and all these fossil fuel products that produce steel. You'll see now ArcelorMittal talks a lot about green steel. You need sometimes these very dirty industries to create jobs because there's a value chain that depends on them. I mean, today we take something for granted, such as ammonia. People in your homes, Handy and so on, it's got ammonia in it. You clean surfaces, you clean your stove with it. That is a major carbon contributor. It comes from coal. It's a byproduct of coal. But most households just get on with life not knowing. And so if you banished coal today, a lot of people would not have ash from which fluoride makes toothpaste. A lot of people would not have the ammonia they use in their household. So I'm not saying polluting the environment is good. I'm just saying that there are certain necessary evils as we find our journey as corporates to be contributive citizenship. In other words, in this instance, to be corporates that change the legacy for future generations. We still have to make peace with the fact that some level of dirty industry is necessary as we transition, because this thing is called the just energy transition.
Correct.
It's not just a total transition. And it doesn't say you must have zero emissions. It says the net effect must be net zero. So there will be good and bads, but when you put them together, they must give you net zero. So in this quagmire of complexity, if we were to feel a sense of logic, if we were to feel a sense of contribution, each one of us, Sintle must say, as a communicator, as a strategic conversation person, what is my fair share of contributive citizenship? The one who runs the studio in terms of the use of lights, how frequently they charge their equipment and using renewable energy to charge, they must also say, as a contributing citizenship towards a better future with less climate emissions and less consumption of resources, what is my fair share of contribution? The teacher in the classroom must say, what is my fair share of contribution as a contributive citizen, ensuring that the children that I teach must have a good aptitude of climate, people, prosperity in terms of the SDGs. We use too many acronyms, Sustainable Development Goals. Because if you look at Sustainable Development Goal number 1, it says, let's leave nobody behind.
Yes.
So our call to be contributive citizenship starts there with SDG 1. What is my fair share of ensuring that in my lifetime we do a serious dent on poverty? So the little cent that I can contribute to an NGO, to a charity, or even start my own NGO, or in the church, ensure that I participate in non-profit efforts that seek to make life better for the next person who's indigent. That is my fair share of contributive citizenship. The nurse, the doctor, has a fair share to contribute in the health system. What is my fair share as a doctor to make sure that as I treat patients, I also empower them to they say prevention is better than cure, to live healthier lifestyles more than relying on my injection. Of course, I get money, but maybe I should try and figure out as a doctor to earn a living more out of promoting healthier lifestyles than administering medicine, for instance. So all of us have to turn what we do on its head and say, how can I make things better for the people I touch? And therefore quantify my fair share of contribution as a contributive citizen towards building a better world.
But Mpo, some might argue that that's a bit of an altruistic perspective because ultimately capitalism is the state that we live in, right? And we all are part of the means of production. But if we zone in on contributive citizenship, I think the provocation also comes from starting in your sphere of influence to that point. So how would that effect work in the instance of a home or in the instance of, a family? How would that impact of you also highlighting and contributing in that setting be made more equitable or fair?
So firstly, let me respond to your question about, is it really just about altruism? It is not. It is the realization that unless we change how we behave, unless we change how we treat the resources at our disposal, we're going to find ourselves without them. If you ask any of the elders in your society, they'll tell you about how much they used to eat raw cocoa, cacao, as in its original name. Today, if you go to any shop to buy a raw cacao, you only get it as an import product in its purest form, in its organic form.
Sure.
And yet, where does it come from on the continent? The country that is most endowed with raw cacao is Ghana.
Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, yeah.
But what do? They make it to the high demand of imports or exports, in this case, in Europe. And yet, in our own country, people used to plant it in their yards. People used to harvest it in communal co-ops. So what you take for granted today, if you don't preserve it, it will be gone for your children tomorrow. So that's the first thing that all of us, so the notion of less is more comes in there. So in the home, municipal refuse collectors these days, I don't know if it happens in your neighborhood. In our neighborhood, as they come to collect refuse, they also distribute plastic bags for recycling.
Ah, okay.
Multicolored. And it's good old seat of Joburg. It's not a private thing. So in our home, I'll speak for my house. In our house, we've got 2 bins. We've got one where we put glass and recyclable things. And we've got one where it's normal refuse.
Okay.
And so when the truck comes, they take the normal refuse. There's another truck that comes subcontracted by Pick It Up that takes the recyclables. So simple things like those. Simple things like teaching your family that maybe when we drink water, let's buy a glass bottle and refill all the time and then use something with glass or paper that you're just going to throw away. Through to let's be clear what we eat. Yes, organic is expensive, but perhaps let's plant where we can in the little space you have in your yard. Surely 1 meter by 1 meter somewhere you can find to plant spinach, to plant the things you consume daily, onions, and whatever else you consume daily. That's your fair share of contribution to saving the planet. Conscientizing your children to bath with less. You don't have to fill up the bathtub with water. Maybe halfway through, as long as your feet are immersed, maybe it's enough. We forget very easily in the Western Cape they had to live with water rations.
Yes.
So all those little things contribute. If all of us planted a tree in our yards, we'll contribute to the moisture in the atmosphere and will mitigate a small portion of climate change. If every church ensure that their yard has got lots of green trees, and again, trees that are indigenous to the area, that don't consume a lot of water, roots below the surface of the soil, fair share contribution to a greener planet. Many, many simple things can be done if we all are conscientious to make our fair share of contribution.
In again, I think looking at that prospect of an awareness of the world that we live in, right? And contributing efficiently, but also equitably. What does success look like for a contributive citizen?
It's back to those 7 dimensions that I mentioned. So a contributive citizen lives conscientiously. So they make it their business. They make sure they are kept awake at night by the question, why am I here on earth? So we have a model at Accentuate Me, the firm that I lead. We have a model that allows you, that enables you to articulate, ideally in 5 words, why you're here on earth. And then most importantly, to articulate yourself in those 7 dimensions. Me, the individual, how does my, as the French would call it, my raison d'être, my reason to exist, how does it shape how I show up as an individual? How I show up as a husband or wife, how I show up as a parent. So later I said I would explain why I'm separating the 2. Generationally, most people, there's various generations. There's the people that are in their 70s, 80s, mostly are baby boomers. The people that are in their 60s are Gen Xers. And the lower end of Gen Xers are people in their late 40s. And then people that are born after 1982 until, because it runs over 20-year cycles, yes, until about 2002 are Gen Y, millennials. And people that are born after 2002 up to 2025 are Gen Z. 2026 will see a new generation being born, known as Generation Beta. So if you look at the existing generations, they've all had to deal with their own challenges, challenges of fatherhood, motherhood, and so on. Now, the reason we separate how you show up as a partner relative to how you show up as a parent is because with the perhaps pandemic outcome of divorce, I'm saying pandemic because baby boomers experienced it for the first time. It was a once in many. But baby boomers themselves, when they became parents, divorce just exponentially grew.
Oh.
Because baby boomers are the first generation where father and mother worked. And so as both parents started working, the family structure got wobbly. And of course, pressures of society and life, people started cheating on their partners with colleagues at work and elsewhere as they socialize. And so as a result, the younger Gen Xers, in other words, people born, say, after, say, between 1979 going to 81, and then the bulk of Gen Y grew up in divorce environments. So they grew up with 2 fathers and 2 mothers. So a child grows up in an environment where Monday to Friday, they're in this household with one parent who often would be the mother that would have been
as the primary caregiver.
The primary caregiving rights. And perhaps weekends, the father has got parenting visitation rights. and the father happens to now be married to another partner, and there's other children there. So they end up experiencing dual loyalty.
Sure.
Monday to Friday, they're with mom and stepdad, and weekends are with dad and stepmom, or vice versa. And so if you look at that correlation, you'll see that that pattern also brought about an environment where the younger Gen Xers and the Gen Ys, the older, because the younger Gen Ys now are starting to work, my son's age, who are in their 20s, they are people who don't want to see themselves receiving a gold watch for 25 years of service. 3 years is more than enough for them in a job. It's because they are used to flexible loyalty. Whereas their grandparents and their older parents and siblings and parents who are Gen Xers born up to 1960 and the generations before, they still had that thing of you've got to have your 10 years of service certificate, your gold watch at 20.
And the loyalty behind it.
Whatever big band watch at 25 and this big pension supposedly. Pension funds are in crisis. A lot of people, baby boomers particularly, have had a shock of their lives. They had to retire at 65. Retiring at 65 and then surprising the pension fund living up to 90 and then being told, oops, the kitty for the pension is running out.
Yeah.
Baby boomers were the first people that, designed this term of retirement as opposed to retire as in retire with the IRE. They put a word, so you put a new tires, you retire, because they found that their pensions couldn't sustain them.
Sure.
Cost of living also, even if the pension fund doesn't run out of funds, the cost of living was just such that they couldn't survive. And baby boomers, to their credit, are the most resilient of all the generations. They've survived analog, they've lived through, if you think about it, if you're a baby boomer born up to 1959, you have seen, and some of us Gen Xers born between 1960 and 1970, we've seen radios called Blaupunkt. In every family in the sitting room, there was this big ornament at the corner there called Tempest or Blaupunkt. It was a big radio box.
Okay.
And it had a vinyl player, and the rest was nothing but a box that had a radio frequency modulator. And so, but the culture of that thing was remarkable. Baby boomers and early Gen Xers know that there was a time that was news time. So in the family, everybody had to shush because it's 6 o'clock, it's news time until about 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, there was a moderated shushing because at the time it was the story. So there would be some drama on radio. Story, please, let's all gather in front of the radio to listen to the story, which would go for about half an hour. And then thereafter, those who were fortunate to have grandparents, the grandmother tells any stories until it's bedtime. But where there was no grandmother figure, the radio would play music, some kind of melancholic music, or the older people, siblings and parents would then switch and play vinyl records. And you would get to know songs like Ula, Shambhala and so on because of the vinyl records.
Yes.
And so that culture was a listening culture because we all had to listen to this radio. Some of us today even still drive with our radios on other than music on because we're from that culture.
Yes.
And then baby boomers witnessed a thing called the Walkman. Today, when you carry your small iPhone, you take a lot of things for granted. There used to be this thing called a Walkman, like this big. You had to have a belt for it. And then these earphones that covered your head, and you walked in the streets with a Walkman. And it had batteries, ever-ready batteries, and all sorts of things. It was a heavy thing. You could not jog comfortably in it. But they've used it as a thing. And then the Walkman just evolved. Sony was the pioneering company that evolved the Walkman into a digitized thing until iPhone came with the iPod. People forget that before the iPhone was a phone, it was an iPod.
Yes.
It was a music thing that collected 10,000 songs in
You
one
could
day.
shuffle back and forth, yeah.
And then Samsung became the first smartphone maker because Nokia gave us the analog phones, and the Swedish company Motorola and all the others. But baby boomers evolved with these things. The laptop in front of you, baby boomers, when they started working, there was a thing called the computer room. And you had to write things down, take it to somebody in the computer room to type it into the computer, give you a printout, and the disc was a tape, a big thing like this that had a soft thing. In the car, we also played tapes. You drive on a corrugated road, this thing gets stuck inside, and then you can't play it anymore. Or you'll forget it in the sun, it crinkles up, you can't play anymore. So we've all evolved through these technologies. And so now, thanks to advancement of technology, we are modern, but equally, it feels like we're cursed because now we've got all these economic challenges. Back to let's preserve what we have. Let's ensure that we become more contributive than extractive. So we're extractive in many ways. We're extractive in terms of high consumption.
Yes.
We're extractive in terms of the negative sides of corruption. We're extractive in terms of just throwing things away, not recycling, not using compost and all those things that we should be doing to make sure that if we recycled, if we did all sorts of things. So it's small bits and pieces of contribution that will help us preserve the planet and make it better for the next generation.
This is the Contributive Citizenship podcast, and we're in conversation with Mpoma. Part of the breakdown of the intergenerational batons that we're handing on each other is also wisdom. And I think that's what you're sharing with us, and it's definitely edifying me. But having had such an illustrious career that's crossed both, the public sector, the private sector, what advice would you give, young Gen Zs that are starting off their careers, but also trying to define what a career looks like in this world where you stay at a job for 2 years and then it's 3 years? What nuggets of wisdom would you share with them?
So maybe this is our last 10 minutes so that we don't get booted out of the studio. But firstly, in fact, incidentally, I have these conversations with my daughter and my son frequently. And last night at dinner, I was engaging my son on this. You've got to appreciate, firstly, that you, as a parent, firstly, you've got to prepare your children for the real world. So he's doing his honors next year. He's starting work. His sister is also finishing her honors. Probably she might decide to go, because of what she's studying, she might decide to go for a master's. But we need to make them realize you're going to arrive at work where if you've not been preparing them to do dishes, to do this, you've been doing them a disservice. Because now they're going to be in this place called the workplace where they have to wash their own mug sometimes. Sometimes they might be fortunate. There might be someone who comes around collecting the marks and switching the marks for them. Little things like those. Life skills are important. 2, emotional intelligence must be taught children early, because the highly competitive professional environments they would get into can be a bit toxic because of the competitive nature. So if they don't know how to cope, they break down. There's high levels of mental challenges at the moment, depression, mental illnesses, because young people enter the labor market without being prepared to cope with that pressure. Simply because each generation, each parent wants to make things easier for their children.
Sure.
And sadly, in so doing, we're shielding our children from the realities of the world. One of my uncles used to tell me in closing a story about what his father did for them when they had, he's a baby boomer, as baby boomers had to prepare for the world of work. He was born in 1957, this uncle. And when he was in his teenage years in the 70s, he was shaped by the generation of 1976 in high school. So his father, apparently my maternal grandfather, noticed this and said to himself, how do I prepare my son for the real world? Remember, this was highly Afrikaans and very... Sure. So he says, my grandfather came home one day and said, son, I got you a temporary job. So uncle got all excited. I'm going to earn some pocket money and get a bit of self-sustenance. Only to find that his grandfather found him a job in a hospital laundry. And there were no washing machines. This was a maternity laundry. And so imagine all the Glodina nappies of the time. There was no disposable nappies.
Oh, my.
That had to be washed by hand. So you soak these things.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's a coming-of-age story for sure.
I'm glad I'm not saying this while you're having your rooibos tea. So, he says he came back home thinking, I've washed so many nappies with poo. And my dad told me it was a good holiday job. I wonder if he really loves me. And when he gets home at the dinner table, grandpa says to him, son, so-and-so, how was your day? Oh, he says, I just broke in tears. And then he says, I know you're probably on your way walking from the bus station and the taxi. They also use trains then from the train station, walking home. You probably thought I didn't love you. I did this because I needed you to see the real world. Oh. I needed you to see that for someone, this wasn't a holiday job. This is where they earned their daily living to provide for their families. And here we end today's episode.
Mpho, thank you. Thank you for your generosity and for sharing with us, your journey of being a young adult, but also the experiences that continue to shape you as a Titan and a contributing citizen. In the next episode, we'll delve into quadrants 28 to 37 and explore the notion that you had provocated me on.
We're way past those quadrants now.
But we have to, because there's a sticking thought for me that you always ring at, that life begins at 36.
Indeed.
And I want us to unpack that. But thank you so much for your generosity of spirit and sharing so many nuggets for us to take home with us. Thank you to everyone that joined and connected. Brought to you and authorized by Mpho Makwana.
Thank you.
Thank you.